As Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faces growing public anger and anxiety over tough opinion polls and a wave of attacks on many fronts, on Monday he permanently suspended Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who was sacked 2 weeks ago for publicly calling to freeze his plans to overhaul the judicial system. Announced his reinstatement. In a speech to nation, Netanyahu also blamed opposition previous government for recent violence, which includes rocket fire from Lebanon, Syria and Gaza Strip, a series of Palestinian terror attacks. His predecessors Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid denounced his allegations, calling Bennett's speech embarrassing and calling him, "take responsibility." In his first speech press conference, Netanyahu lashed out at those who opposed planned shake-up of judiciary, which he paused after mass protests and general strike in response to Gallant's undermining, promised that right religious coalition would restore security. "Our country is under terrorist attack," he said. But it hasn't started now. During the previous government, the number of terrorist attacks doubled. Netanyahu claimed that the previous government showed weakness by emboldening Israel's enemies. He criticized a US-backed maritime demarcation agreement with Lebanon, which he said was wrongly signed with the Lebanese terrorist group Hezbollah. The previous government delivered land and gas deposits to the enemy without getting anything in return, he accused. The Prime Minister tried link last year's deal with escalating attacks, before turning to mass protests since beginning of year against his government's plans radically restrict judiciary. He also claimed that warnings by the reservist forces that they could refuse service if his government moved forward with the legislative package also reflected a weakness to Israel's enemies. "How do you think our enemies interpret it when you declare the state of Israel to collapse?" Netanyahu said he asked opposition leader Yair Lapid when the two met on Sunday for a security briefing. "Our enemies see this, they hear this. They believe they can defeat us with combined terror from Lebanon, Syria and Gaza. You know me. I act decisively and above all responsibly," said Netanyahu. "People of Israel, I tell you tonight, we will repel these threats and defeat our enemies. We have done this in the past and we will do it again. We will restore deterrence, fix the damage we have inherited," he said, adding that enemies who saw an opportunity to attack were deeply mistaken. Noting the retaliatory attacks in Syria, Netanyahu said he could not provide details on everything we did for Israel's security, but we are doing a lot. "The Assad regime knows that price we are demanding is only the beginning," warned Prime Minister. Netanyahu then covered response from Lebanon to the largest rocket attack since 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah last week. Israel then struck sites linked to the ruling Hamas terror group in Gaza, which was blamed for the rocket launch in Lebanon. Netanyahu falsely claimed that Hezbollah was also targeted. Citing his government's efforts to thwart the attacks, Netanyahu said, "There are still many warnings. But I promise we will catch and reckon with all the vile terrorists who are slaughtering our people." Netanyahu concluded his prepared remarks by saying that Defense Minister Gallant will remain in his post after 2 weeks of uncertainty after the Prime Minister announced the minister's dismissal. "We had differences, even serious differences," he said of Gallant. "But I've decided to put the arguments behind us." After the press conference, Gallant tweeted a photo of himself and Netanyahu with the caption, "We continue with all our strength for Israel's security." Penalties from Bennett, Lapid, Gantz Netanyahu's words were quickly condemned by the leaders of the previous government. Instead of holding a press conference blaming others for the problems caused by his extremist failed government, it's time for Netanyahu, his ministers to stop whining, finally take responsibility, opposition leader Lapid said. Former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett described Netanyahu's speech as non-leadership and shameful, and dismissed his accusation that the deal with Lebanon undermined Israel's deterrence. "The deal was with Lebanon, not Hezbollah, and what Hezbollah is doing now has nothing to do with this deal," Bennett said. "This is the time to lead, not blame others." Benny Gantz, chairman of the opposition party, National Unity, which has recently seen growing support in opinion polls, tweeted, "Leadership cannot be built by whining. Yisrael Beytenu leader Avigdor Liberman said Netanyahu's speech proved man was unfit for the job and claimed that Prime Minister's son, Yair, was dictating policy. The only conclusion to come out of all trolls we've seen and heard tonight is that, in the best-case scenario, Benjamin Netanyahu is Yair Netanyahu's contractor, Liberman said, referring to reports of Yair's growing influence over Prime Minister. During a press conference, Netanyahu flatly denied that his son was influencing politics, describing him as an independent person with zero influence. Asking questions after his speech, Netanyahu denied that Israel was weakening its position on the international stage by pursuing a radical judicial revision. He predicted that he would soon make a White House visit, after U.S. President Joe Biden refused such an invitation while urging him to abandon the law. Asked whether he was persona non grata at White House and elsewhere, Netanyahu appealed to a spokesman for the National Security Council who recently spoke of U.S.-Israeli ties as strong as ever, underscoring his 40-year relationship with Biden. "I assume you'll have a deal," said Netanyahu, apparently referring to the reconciliation talks on the revision. "Then what are you going to say? When there is a visit, then what will you say? Relations with the United States are very close," he said. "Security intelligence cooperation is happening now and is stronger closer than ever before." 2 weeks ago, Biden urged Netanyahu to get away from the judicial revision package, saying he was very concerned about the health of Israeli democracy and warning that Israel cannot continue on this path. Biden also said no when asked if he would invite Netanyahu to the White House, not in the near term. Netanyahu was also asked at the press conference about banners that read "Fuck Biden" at right-wing rallies. "I absolutely condemn the blasphemy directed at Joe Biden. This is Israel as a sovereign state, and that doesn't mean that the Israeli Prime Minister can't have a short word occasionally to the United States. This is called no. Sometimes there is a 3-letter word. It's called yes. But you should have the freedom to say both, and I do too. I protect that freedom because I think it's important." Referring to leaked U.S. intelligence reports that Israel could supply lethal weapons to Ukraine, Netanyahu said, "I don't know what the basis for these reports is. We decided to help them with humanitarian issues, civil defense, red alert, system, that sort of thing. With LY weapons. No decision has been made regarding. I will do my best to help resolve this dispute, if I can." Netanyahu also claimed that the European leaders he met recently said positive things to him in private, but spoke differently when he was around the media. "When I met the leaders of Britain, France, Germany and Italy recently, unlike the meetings where other people were there, what they told me behind closed doors reflects a completely different interaction," he said. Later, pro forma, he said, "These leaders should emphasize that, I believe in a two-state solution for two peoples. Everyone needs to say that and say something about judicial reform." He also dismissed a television poll released on Sunday that showed the parliamentary bloc had fallen to 46 out of 120 seats in the Knesset in a possible election. "I've seen worse," he said. "This government will serve 4 years. Ultimately, determinant will be the way we handle security, economy, health, education and peace."